that first part, that first like 6 weeks where you're formulating your plan, is the same wherever you may be shooting it, I think. And then certainly once I'd kind of presented those ideas to John, and John was kind of on the same belief that we thought we were going to go for a kind of very desaturated, washed out, largely blue palette for our Russia stuff. It would be far more primary for our American stuff, and then we would go with more pastels for our Japanese stuff. Once we'd kind of all settled on that way forward, then you started to knit how we were going to try and make the locations work. You know, whether it was going to be in Glasgow. We did look to be in London and Budapest, and before then it was going to be in Berlin. So we'd got our kind of our MO for the film, and then we just had to try and marry them with the spaces that we were able to find, or not, and in which case then we would have to build. John and I were on board together with what I wanted to do with the film from the start, and he was very much kind of, I mean, when you read the film, it talks about, you know, Henk saying that when he was first over or maybe that was the documentary that I watched. Yes, it was a documentary I watched about Henk when he was over in Russia. He said they'd literally like switched the colour off. It was just became all grey. So you have an immediate starting point from the documentary and the research and the script. I mean, it kind of designs itself really. You don't really have to force it in one direction because it just kind of sits very nicely together. And so very quickly, John and I were on the same page in terms of where we wanted to take it. And then Alvin kind of came in quite late because he was only on the project. He was only on the project with maybe 6 to 7 weeks left, and we'd already developed kind of a way forward with both John and with Nat. And in fact, Nat phoned me and we talked about what we were doing, and we'd already into line. We kind of come into line quite quickly because it's the script kind of commands you to do that. Really, you can't push it in one way because it just won't go that way. When Alvin came in, we talked about whether or not the desaturation was going to be done in camera or that he was going to take it out in post. So we did a few camera tests and worked out that, you know, there were some reds actually that wouldn't work. So we had to be quite careful with our Soviet flag regs because when he desaturated it, they would go a bit brown. So we had to make sure that there were some colours that we went slightly brighter, knowing that we were going to turn them down in post. And there were some things that kind of behaved more or less as you would imagine if the colour was taken out. So we used a lot of blues, a lot of greys. The oranges became a bit more pastel-y. We tried to steer clear, certainly for our exterior Russian stuff, of any warm tones. So there weren't really any yellows. Aside from our Soviet flags, there weren't kind of reds or oranges. And we just tried to cool it down all the time for that. And Nat was kind of reflected that with his costume design too. Kremlin was going to go really white, as per all of the reference. And it was lots of gold and red carpet. Valentin, we were going to go with a bit more wood finished, and it was going to be blue carpet. And then Elog was going to be a lot more earthy because they were the bottom of the pile. So we looked at the Glasgow City Chambers, we looked at Edinburgh City Chambers, and there was another location that we were looking at for our interior Kremlin, but nothing quite hit the kind of the opulence level that we wanted for the Kremlin, although Gorbachev isn't quite like that. And then when we found the Signet Library, it was just perfect because it was absolutely stunning, over the top, very opulent. And if you think about you haven't seen the other spaces, but we've got this huge disparity in the kind of level of opulence through the film. We've got kind of where Alexei gets thrown, which is kind of he's guarded by the KGB in this squalor, and then we've got the Kremlin. It's a huge spread. Well, Elog was a funny one because Elog, we knew what it looked like in reality, and it was a very kind of neoclassical mansion that was on the outskirts of Moscow, but didn't really feel that really worked with the spectrum of buildings and architecture that we had through the film. And we'd already hit neoclassical a couple of times with our Kremlin and with our Valentin's office. So we wanted to go something slightly different with that. So we made that 60s, a more 60s build, which matches to the zoology building up here in Aberdeen. Which, funny enough, when John said to me, I think we're going to be shooting in Scotland, have you seen any brutalist buildings in Scotland? The building that we're shooting in today, the building that was Elorg, is the first building that I sent him a photograph of. So it's nice that it's done a complete circle. And actually, it's the building that John went to university in. We've managed to find a DVK3, which is a model of an Electronica 80, which is the computer that Alexei coded Tetris on originally, that we got shipped out of Moscow, although it got held up at customs for about 2 weeks. Got shipped over. We then 3D printed it, 3D scanned it, 3D printed it, and then made 8. So in the Moscow Computer Science Center, he's coding on a kind of our version of a DVK3, which is the Electronica 80, which is the one that he really coded on. So that's quite nice to make sure that we've done our right level of homework, and we've got a real computer out of Moscow that we've scanned and rebuilt or made versions of. We've almost definitely got an angle that way all the time, but obviously undoubtedly there's going to be two people having a conversation, and you're going to need the reverse, and we have often had to kind of either cheat the reverse or shoot it a lot lensier so we're softer behind, or we've had to frame it in a way that we're up underneath the eye line so we're into sky. So we have struggled obviously often finding the reverse, or we're only able to bring them in from there to that, rather than a nice kind of sweeping move to reveal something. And I'm sure there's going to be loads of CG, but certainly any kind of developing shot where we'll kind of lift off from them to reveal a wider environment, there's going to be that to replace, that to replace, that to replace, that to replace. But that would be the same, I think, even if we were to do it in Russia now, because we're not in 1988. I think it is about companionship and friendship, and that these two kindred spirits on opposite side of the ocean, capitalist and communist, have kind of come together to have this mutual love of video gaming and creating something that brings so much joy to the entire country.